I welcome you to this, our virtual tour of heritage sites in our parish. The tour is being organised and led by Breda Lynch. Breda has been a long-time member of Éigse Sliabh Rua. From her teenage years, or even before, she's been attending some of our events with her grandparents initially. After secondary school, she went on to study in Maynooth University, and surprise, surprise, the topic she chose was local history. We don't have to wonder where she got the idea. Having qualified there, she was encouraged to do further studies and ended up doing a doctorate in again in history, and produced a tremendous volume concerning dealing with the Cistercian monasteries in Ireland, based in the medieval period. So Breda is very well qualified to do this tour for us. So we begin our virtual tour here at Rappatrick Cemetery.
The church here at Rappatrick dates to the 11th century, and it is highly likely that an even earlier church stood on this site. Elements of the 11th and 13th centuries, along with later alterations, are evident in the building that stands here in ruins today. The church was mentioned in ecclesiastical taxations about the years 1300, 1320 and 1350. In 1445, the vicarage was held along with Kilmacow and was vacant in 1591. In 1615, the church had no curate, but the church and chancel were still in good repair. In 1622, the visitation of the Diocese of Ossory stated that the church of Rappatrick is well repaired. From the 13th century until the dissolution of the religious houses in 1540, Rappatrick Church and its benefices were controlled by the abbess of the nunnery of Kilculloheen. Afterwards, they came under the control of Waterford Corporation. While Rappatrick Church, Rectory and Vicarage remained under the jurisdiction of the state or Reformed Church throughout most of the 17th century, the majority of the population stayed loyal to the Roman Church and the reforms of Bishop Roath. As such, the local Catholic community would have abandoned Rappatrick Church as a place of worship. During the height of the penal laws in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, it is likely that they did not have a church or mass house to worship in. The small local Protestant congregation moved to Kilcullen Church, which was rebuilt in the early 18th century. This resulted in the abandonment of Rappatrick Church and its subsequent ruin. The remains of the church are now overgrown. The interior measures internally 24.4 metres or 80 feet in length, east to west, by 5.03 metres or 16.5 feet in width. The interior was undivided between nave and chancel. Today, the west half, the old nave, survives in the best condition, although this section is probably the oldest. In this area, the north wall survives almost to full height, but is largely covered with ivy. It contains a small, round-headed doorway that is 64 centimetres in width. The west wall of the nave survives to 1.5 metres in height, while the south wall is quite ruined. It may have had a south doorway. The style of the north doorway would suggest that the nave is pre-Romanesque, perhaps 11th century in date. The chancel, on the other hand, is probably a later addition, perhaps 13th century or later. The graveyard extends to the south of the church, There are a few late 18th century gravestones and 3 large box tombs within the ruined building. The area to the north of the church is heavily overgrown, unlike that to the south, which is maintained. There are some surviving fragments of the tomb of Nicholas Fitzgerald, Lord of Gurteens, who died in 1617. One is located against the north wall of the chancel and bears his name. 2 more are built into the west wall of the graveyard, and one bears the date 1609. In the graveyard to the south of the church are a number of distinctive early 18th century gravestones carved by the local sculptor Darby O'Brien. These are crudely fashioned in high relief but have a simplistic beauty about them. There is also a small cross carved by him on the west wall of the graveyard over the fragments of the Fitzgerald tomb. The name of the church derives from Raw Fodric, which was a large earthwork that was located to the northwest. It was still extant in 1839, but was just destroyed sometime afterwards. The name Drumdownick probably derives from an early Christian church that was located on the site of the present ruined Rapatrick. To the north of the latter, in the neighbouring townland of Luffany, is the Grey Cross, carved by Darby O'Brien in 1736 to commemorate members of his family who died from 1690 to 1732. Although this is effectively a headstone dedicated to the memory of Darby's family and forebears, the original location of the cross is lost to history. However, it is known that the cross once stood on the nearby farm owned by the Fitzgerald family and was moved to its current location about 100 years ago. This type of monument is more correctly termed a wayside or roadside cross and is made of local conglomerate stone. Darby O'Brien lived in the townland of Drumdowney, and according to Canon Carrigan's History and Antiquities of the Diocese of Ossory, Darby completed similar work in other areas of South Kilkenny. A cross crafted by the hand of Darby O'Brien stands in Clonamery Cemetery in Innisteague parish. Interestingly, this is also a pre-Norman church and dates to the 10th century. The church and nearby castle also have connections with the Fitzgerald family. This granite headstone was badly worn when Carrigan was writing in the late 18th century, and he was unable to read the full inscription at that time. The inscription reads, "Here lieth ye body of Sylvester," with just 3 letters W-H-E of the surname, and nothing more is legible. Just as Darby's crosses commemorate those whose names are known to us today, so too the later gravestones in Rapatrick Cemetery tell us of families whose names no longer exist in our parish. The text of 111 headstones are recorded in the Book of Inscriptions compiled in 2004. These range in date from 1609 to 1962 and range in age from young children to 2 people aged 98 years. Patrick Lawler, who died on the 23rd of January 1906, and William Kelly, who died 28th of October 1796. While this age range is expected and merely of passing interest, as so many headstones either do not bear ages or those inscribed may not be an accurate reflection of the person's age, it is interesting to think of a person living to within 2 years of a century in our parish in the late 1700s. Names that appear include many well known to us in the parish, those such as Carney, Welch, Grant, Griffin, Wall, Kavanagh, Fitzgerald, Roach and Irish, along with many, many more, are included. However, others such as Otteridge, Eade, Merrigan, Corrivan, Casey, Lennon, Gorman, Furlan, Minton, Ede, Sarsfield and Ennet also appear. These indicate names of those who once knew this place and walked and lived in this locality, and now their names are spoken no more in our everyday conversations. But still they are remembered. Their names are inscribed forever in stone in this ancient and hallowed place. On the reverse of one of those stones is inscribed this reminder to us all. Ah, dear reader, as you pass by, remember death and heave a sigh. For I, like you, on earth did bloom, and you, like me, must fill a tomb. Remember man, and pray for me. Beneath this stone in death reclined, a dear and only son did lie, who in the prime of life resigned his soul to God who reigns on high. His loss, his mother deplore. His friends all shed a passing tear. Their sighs to life can't him restore. His soul's in bliss, his body here.
Go again.
We have already referenced from Downey and visiting the Rapatrick cemetery site. So now we'll turn to the other locations mentioned in the 1411 rental.
In 1431, William and Shane O'Crehon agreed before Walter Sherlock, the seneschal of the 4th Earl of Ormond, to build 3 houses on their holding near the parish of Rapatrick. These houses would have been fortified houses or tower houses, and it is likely that James the 4th Earl wished to construct these to defend the southeast corner of his earldom from any external threat. The 3 castles of Gurteens, Ballinlaw and Kilmurray would certainly seem to fit this request. By the 16th century, both Gurteens and Kilmurray were owned by the Fitzgerald O'Dea family. At this time, Gurteens was both their manor and their residence. All that is left today of Gurteens Castle is a high, late medieval gatehouse. Nevertheless, this is in fact a tower house which overlies an entrance passageway that would have given access into the bawn of the castle. It is likely that this was the principal tower and residence of the Fitzgerald's manorial centre in the late Middle Ages. References throughout the late 16th century indicate that Thomas O'Dea lived at Gurteens and held his lands from the 10th Earl of Ormond, known as Black Tom. This is the same Black Tom who had the manor house built at Ormond Castle in Carrick-on-Suir. During the period known as the Cromwellian settlement, the Catholic landowners and merchants were transplanted to Connacht, and this included the Fitzgeralds of Gurteens. In 1654, the then Lord of Gurteens, John Fitzgerald, was transplanted to County Mayo, where he was allocated a large estate. After the subsequent restoration, John petitioned to have his Gurteens estate restored, but his petition was refused. The old Fitzgerald estate was divided among Cromwellian newcomers. Ballinlaw Castle is a small tower house with an adjoining modern house and an enclosed yard, which may have been originally the fortified enclosure or bawn of the castle. It is located on the border of the medieval parishes of Rapatrick and Kilcullen. It may have been built to defend the old Drumdowney ferry on the River Barrow, which it overlooked. This property was owned by the Butlers until the 17th century, and Ringville House is located a number of fields away to the north. The entry to the castle is through a Gothic doorway that is constructed of dressed limestone masonry. This is in contrast with the rest of the original building, which is made of roughly dressed and angular blocks of local sandstone and conglomerate. There is a rebate on the outside of the doorway for an iron defensive feature known as a yett. There is a lobby on the inside which gives access to the mural stairway and the upper floors. The castle has a connection to the family of John O'Donovan through the Gall Burkes. That family claimed to descend from Richard de Burgo, the Red Earl of Ulster, who died in 1326. The Gall Burkes settled at Gallstown, where they were given lands by the Earl of Ormond. O'Donovan claimed that the castle was built by the Gall Burkes. Members of the family certainly lived in the castle. Perhaps in a nod to this connection, the field in which Ballinlaw Castle stands is called Gall's Garden. In the 17th century, the castle and surrounding lands were still in Butler hands before being later held by Nicholas Devereux, who resided here for a time before moving to Ringville House. To the south, Ballinlaw Castle overlooks Old Camnock Ferry slipway on the nearby western bank of the River Barrow, first mentioned in the 15th century. In modern times, this was known as the Ballinlaw Ferry and continued in use until the 20th century, offering passage to a wide variety of goods and characters. With the completion of the Waterford to Rosslare Railway crossing the south of the parish in 1906, the ferry gradually went out of use. Similar in style and date to Ballinlaw Castle, Kilmurry Castle was probably constructed as a late medieval defended chapel and residence for a priest. Local tradition identifies the site of the graveyard of Kilmurry in a field to the northeast of the castle. Kilmurry Castle consists of an oblong tower house with a ground, first and second storey, with a modern battlement above and an adjoining defended chapel. The design of the tower house elements at Kilmurry and Ballinlaw are very similar, and it is likely that they were built by the same stonemasons back in the 15th century. We have already made reference to the 16th century Reformation when discussing Rapatrick Church, and this event also impacted on Kilmurry Castle. Up to this time, the Church of Kilmurry Castle would have functioned as a chapel of Éigse to Rapatrick under the patronage of the Fitzgerald O'Dees of Gurteens, to administer to the spiritual needs of the people of Kilmurry townland. After the Reformation, the church at Kilmurry Castle came under the control of the Reformed Church, but we have no record of Reformed clergymen using it. The Roman Catholic Church experienced a brief renaissance during the 1640s when the Kilkenny Confederate government ruled most of the country, but the Cromwellian victory changed that. The use of the chapel at Kilmurry Castle ended in 1653 with the decree of banishment of priests, and the parochial system established by Bishop Rose could not operate during the Cromwellian regime. The use of the chapel at Kilmurry as a place of worship ended at this time. Subsequent renovations to the structure in the 17th century included the conversion of the chapel into a dwelling, and internal ecclesiastical features such as the holy water stoup and the piscina, which was used for the cleansing of the sacred vessels, were blocked up. The altar was replaced by a large fireplace. By the later 17th century, the annual pattern at Our Lady's Well, Slieverue, was celebrated on the 24th of August, and this tradition continued until the early 19th century. In 1704, James Ryan is listed as the parish priest. Due to the situation at Rapatrick Church and its chapel of Éigse at Kilmurry Castle, it is likely that he had no chapel available to him in his parish and may have had to conduct masses in the open air. In the 18th century, a chapel was established at Slieverue, and this was in turn replaced by the present parish church built in 1800. For over 200 years, the present parish church has served generations of the local Catholic community since it was built in 1800. It replaced a chapel or mass house which was located nearby. The church is the second oldest parish church in the Diocese of Ossory. The land was donated by John Snow of Snow Hill in memory of his wife Eliza. The church was built by subscription. While the design, layout and decoration of the building may be simple, its construction was a huge statement and a testament to the faith of our forebears. The church is cruciform in layout, and over the east gable is the belfry, while two of the other gables are surmounted by stone crosses. Inside the church there are 3 galleries, each of which are curved. The first refurbishment occurred in the early 1900s. The work at this point included the insertion of a new floor and the purchase of an organ. In 1910-11, the railings, piers and gates at the front were erected. In the 1920s, the graveyard had to be extended, so a field was bought from Mrs. Stapleton. Part of a field on the opposite side was donated by Richard Wall for the same purpose. In a huge undertaking, the wall enclosing the graveyard was erected in 1924. In 1920, both the baptismal font and the Paschal candle stand were donated. After Vatican II, the necessary alterations were made, which included moving the altar and later removing the altar rails. One of the most striking features of the church are the stained glass windows, with 13 in total. 2 on either side of the sanctuary date to 1897 and are from the workshop of Franz Mayer and Company of Munich. The other 11 stained glass windows were inserted in 1924. These were donated by various parishioners. The donors' names and or intentions are included in a panel on each window. The Stations of the Cross also bear the donors' names. In 1994, the most recent and most substantial renovation was undertaken. This included the construction of a new roof, with new wiring and plastering completed. The interior was also changed, with a new altar and sanctuary furnishings installed. The floor was carpeted for the first time, the floor having been bare wood up to this point. Although life has changed for us all in this year of 2020, our church continues to adapt to these changes, embracing new technology with a webcam inserted and masses regularly streamed on Facebook Live. Our parish church continues to be a focal point for life in our parish, offering a welcome for all.
The parish church has always been central to the lives in Slieverue, and this was very much in evidence in 1950 when Carriganore Cross was erected and is so prominent in the parish. On that occasion, a procession took place from the church, and as the parishioners processed, there was brief stops and Stations of the Cross were erected along the way, and the final station then was up at the cross. Now, that was a wooden cross which was constructed by local carpenters. By 1975, the original cross had deteriorated and was replaced by a concrete structure in 1975, and that is still very much in evidence as one passes on the road to New Ross, up on the hill on the left. That 1970 cross was again the workmanship of local people, tradesmen of various hues, and unfortunately most of those have now passed on. May they all rest in peace. We will now visit the cross.
A great display of religious fervour took place in the parish on February 26, 1950, when the cross on Carriganore Rock was blessed. In that holy year, many crosses were erected around the country to mark the Jubilee, and it is claimed that Carriganore Cross was the first in County Kilkenny. The site was well chosen. Since it is the highest point in the parish, the cross is visible for a great distance, and being near the main road is now an established landmark. The cross was made of wood, was 25 feet tall, and had an arm span of 12 feet. It was manufactured by Peter Welsh, the milepost, and its erection was supervised by him. It was estimated at the time that as many as 1,000 people participated in the ceremony. There was a procession from Slieverue village which started at 2:30 p.m. and was led by Canon James Ryan, PP, accompanied by Fathers Halley, CC Ferrybank, Hines, CC Glenmore, McGrath, CC Glenmore, and Dr. Hughes, CC Slieverue. Along the 2-mile route, 13 small crosses had been erected at intervals by the roadside, and at each one the procession stopped and a decade of the Rosary was recited. The ceremony concluded with further prayers by the cross on the rock. The entire proceedings were relayed by loudspeaker, which was operated by Jimmy Marr, Slieverue. By the 1970s, the cross had deteriorated, and in 1975 it was replaced by a steel and concrete structure. This again was a significant achievement. The making of the steel frame was undertaken by some of the staff of Clover Meats, Ned O'Dwyer and Michael Griffin being prominent. It was transported to the rock by Jimmy and Tommy Hogan. The concrete was supplied by Readymix. This was arranged by Jim Boylan. Seamus Jones supervised and attended to the filling of the casing which he had built around the frame. Many parishioners helping in the conveying by buckets of the concrete up the face of the rock. Satisfaction was felt by all the participants when the job was complete. The cross continues to be a notable landmark and acts as a reminder of our Christian heritage. Another notable type of feature which was once very prominent in our landscape are lime kilns. A wonderful example exists at Ballincrea, which we see here. Also preserved in the parish is the name of the kiln or kill road, evidence of another such structure. Lime kilns were once common features of rural landscapes throughout Ireland in the 18th, 19th and 20th centuries. Now most have been destroyed or have faded into the landscape. Lime kilns were structures in which limestone was heated to 180 degrees to produce quicklime. As there is no limestone to be found in Slieverue, it had to be brought in here by river or other alternative means. Much of the limestone burned in this area came from Kilmacow, where it was quarried and then brought down the Pill or by horse and cart to Smart's Castle and conveyed from there to the kiln in the vicinity. The most common type of lime kiln consisted of an egg cup-shaped burning chamber constructed of brick or stone with an air inlet at the base called the eye. The limestone to be burnt had to be broken into fairly uniform pieces about the size of a fist before they were transported to the site by horse and cart or wheelbarrow. The burning process began with the laying of an iron grate over the eye at the base of the chamber. Then alternating dome-shaped layers of limestone and fuel were built into the kiln chamber on top of the grate bars. When loading was complete, the kiln was kindled at the bottom and the fire gradually spread upwards through the eye into the chamber, burning limestone and fuel in succession. When burnt through, the quicklime was cooled and raked out through the base, while the fine ash dropped out and was rejected with the larger waste materials. Because the lime kiln was filled from the top and could also be unloaded from there, access to the top was necessary. Therefore, kilns were generally constructed on either a rock face or earthen bank to permit this. Ramps were sometimes built to allow access also. Quicklime, or burnt lime as it was also known, would have been used primarily on agricultural land to improve the quality of the land by breaking up heavy clay soil, neutralising highly acidic soil, or sweetening the grass for livestock.
We now come to the final segment of our presentation, where we perhaps kept the best wine until last. We wish to focus on John O'Donovan, one of the great scholarly characters of our past. We wish now to focus on a number of sites throughout the parish connected with O'Donovan. We will start at Éigse Moor, where John O'Donovan grew up.
The name of Éigse Moor is known to scholars throughout the country and internationally because of its most famous son, John O'Donovan. John was born here on the 26th of July in 1806. He was the seventh of 9 children born to Edmund O'Donovan and Eleanor Haberlin. We know that John was baptised by the Very Reverend J. Fitzpatrick, PP, and his sponsors were Edmund Wall and Eleanor Neal. The O'Donovan connection with the locality stretches back to the early 1600s, when John O'Donovan's great-great-great-grandfather, Edmund O'Donovan, fled his native part of West Munster, having murdered one of the O'Sullivans of Beara. Edmund married Catherine Gall Burke, and they lived in Ballinlaw Castle after their marriage in 1638. John's grandfather, Edmund, was born in Drumdowney Lower in 1720, and in 1763 moved to Attertymore. When the family settled in Attertymore, it comprised of Edmund and Mary and their 4 children, William, Patrick, John and Edmund Ogue. Edmund's mother, Mary Aberlin, also lived with the family. 3 more children followed, Michael, Cornelius and Bridget. In time, all except Edmund Ogue moved away from the family home and 55-acre farm. On the 6th of October 1788, Edmund Ogue married Eleanor Haberlin, and their family of 9 followed over the next number of years, with John born in 1806. The early years of John's life coincided with the period of the Napoleonic Wars, and the O'Donovans, like other farmers at the time, experienced a considerable prosperity due to the demand for food during the wars from 1812 to 1815, and so became relatively well off. Edmund Ogue built a new house which was completed in 1816. However, immediately following the war, the prices of farm produce collapsed, leaving the O'Donovans in an impoverished situation. The death of John's father in 1817 led to the dispersal of the family. John's uncle, Patrick, was a huge influence on him during his formative years, and Patrick's stories and legends had a profound influence on the future scholar, inspiring him with a love for Irish archaeology, history and traditions. Patrick also had connections with Kennedy's or Baldwin's mill situated in Glasshouse, working there in the early 1780s. When Patrick and his wife, Mary O'Neill of Kilmurray, moved to Ballinlaw in 1785, they built a dwelling house and a new mill by the stream, located close to the old Ringville School. Unfortunately, no trace of the house or mill exists today. Next, Patrick took a lease on a 16-acre farm in Ballarowra and again built a dwelling house and mill. This mill remained in the family for 3 generations. During this period of his life, John received his education firstly from the local hedge school and later in Ned Hunt's Academy in Waterford, where he learned arithmetic, English grammar and bookkeeping, among other subjects. John's aptitude quickly became apparent, and in 1822 he began his own school in the locality. This was somewhat short-lived, as he moved to Dublin the following year, 1823, to live again with his brother William. By this time, William had given up the 40-acre farm in Ballarowra and had gained employment in a merchant's shop in Dublin. John attended a Latin school in Dublin for the next number of years. 1827 was surely a pivotal year in John's story, as it was that year that he gained employment in the office of Mr. James Hardiman, Commissioner of the Public Records, working here until 1830. John's knowledge of the Irish language was now in demand. During his employment with Hardiman, John copied Peter O'Connell's Irish Dictionary, among other manuscripts, while also conducting other business in Hardiman's office. John O'Donovan was hired by the Ordnance Survey in October 1830 as orthographer and etymologist. He worked alone at first in the Dublin libraries, preparing the groundwork for a study of the place names and a topographical memoir. A department grew up around O'Donovan, which had 11 people at its high point in 1840. George Petrie, artist, archaeologist and antiquarian, was appointed as supervisor. Although the two men occasionally clashed on academic points, there was a mutual respect for each other in their own specialist fields. O'Donovan proclaimed Petrie to be the greatest antiquarian that Ireland had ever produced, and Petrie acknowledged O'Donovan's unrivalled mastery in Irish language and literature. Petrie paid tribute to O'Donovan in an article in the Dublin Penny Journal, the 8th of June 1833, where he described him as the most able and judicious Irish scholar and topographer that Ireland has produced for the last century. The team was based in 21 Great Charles Street, Dublin, the house of Petrie, which became known as T. Petrie. The men that the Ordnance Survey Memoir project brought together were outstanding in their field, such as James Clarence Mangan, William Wakefield and Eugene Curry, and some of them went on to become leading lights in academia, literature and historical research. In the 1830s, there was an acute awareness that the native community was undergoing radical change, and this gave the project of information gathering an added urgency, and it was an impetus to collect as much as possible. Together, the men of T. Petrie researched and established the correct origin of as many as Ireland's 63,000 townland names as possible. O'Donovan was the authority for a translation from Irish and English. He followed the Royal Engineer Surveyors, determining spelling and pronunciation, and suggested appropriate anglicised versions. The records of this work are known as the O'Donovan Name Books. O'Donovan's letters to Thomas Larkham, known as the OS letters, are regarded as an important record of the ancient lore of Ireland for those counties he documented during his years of travel throughout much of Ireland. One of O'Donovan's other outstanding achievements was the translation of the Annals of the Four Masters. In 1831, George Petrie arranged for the purchase by the Royal Irish Academy of an autograph set of the Annals, and this opened the way to begin the task of translating and notating the work. John O'Donovan, now a member of the Academy and recognised as an eminent Gaelic scholar, began the task. Many early attempts to translate the Annals had been made, but the work was difficult, as the Irish used by the annalist was an archaic and formal style known by the learned olive classes in Gaelic society. John O'Donovan published his 7-volume translation of the Annals of the Kingdom of Ireland, or, as they are also known, the Annals of the Four Masters, between 1841 and 1851. The translation was funded by a government grant of £1,000, obtained by the notable mathematician Sir William Rowan Hamilton, President of the Royal Irish Academy. The Annals were published in both Irish and English, with extensive notes researched and written to give the reader the background to the text. O'Donovan became Professor of Celtic Languages at Queen's University and was called to the bar in 1847. His work on linguistics was recognised in 1848 by the Royal Irish Academy, who awarded him their prestigious Cunningham Medal. On the recommendation of Grimm, he was elected a corresponding member of the Royal Academy of Prussia in 1856. In 1840, John married Mary Ann Broughton, and together they had 8 sons. 3 of the sons, Edmund, Henry and Morgan Arthur O'Connor O'Donovan, died as young children, and they are buried together in Glasnevin Cemetery. His son John died aged 31 in 1873 in St. Louis County, Missouri. He's buried at Calvary Cemetery and Mausoleum in Missouri. The obituary states, Professor O'Donovan of the Christian Brothers College of St. Louis was drowned in Creve Coeur Lake, near that city, Monday, while swimming with some of the students. He was the son of John O'Donovan, the celebrated Irish historian. His son William, born 1846 and died in 1886 in Manhattan, New York. He's buried in Calvary Cemetery, Queens County, New York. His obituary reads, William O'Donovan, brother of the famous London Daily News correspondent died on Sunday 25th of April in New York after a brief illness. He was himself a correspondent in Paris during the siege and the Commune, and in Spain during the last Carlist War. When Mr. Foster suppressed United Ireland and arrested the Land League leaders, Mr. O'Donovan was associate editor of that paper, but escaped arrest and has since been engaged in journalism in New York. His son, Daniel Cornelius O'Donovan, born in 1856, died on the 23rd of October 1932, aged 76, in Prestatyn, Wales, where he is buried. His son, Richard, who was the last of John and Mary Ann's children to die, died in 1839, aged 90. He also lived in Prestatyn, Wales, where he is buried. An obituary reads, "The death has taken place at his residence, 7 Norfolk Avenue, Prestatyn, North Wales, of Mr. Richard O'Donovan, last surviving son of Dr. John O'Donovan, the famous Gaelic scholar and translator of the Annals of the Four Masters. Mr. O'Donovan was in his 91st year and had been bedridden for 3 years, but was in full possession of his mental faculties. In the final stages of his illness, he was visited by his daughter, Mrs. Éigse, wife of a Liverpool doctor. He was the brother of the distinguished war correspondent, Edmund O'Donovan. Richard O'Donovan was born in number 8 New Common Court, North Strand, Dublin, on November 29th, 1848, the year in which his father sent forth from that address to the public his translation of the first volume of the Annals of the Four Masters. He secured a position as a translator in the Royal Insurance Company, Liverpool, and remained with the firm for over 43 years when he retired. In 1881, he married Miss Anne Cahill from Ennis, County Clare, in St. Michan's Church, Dublin. In 1919, Mr. Richard O'Donovan settled down in Prestatyn to be near his daughter. He was widely read and had a good knowledge of French, Italian, German and Spanish. Up to the end, he took a keen interest in Irish affairs. He was a devout Catholic and passed away fortified by the rites of the Church. As we've seen, obituaries for 2 of the brothers mention a relationship to the esteemed and distinguished war correspondent Edmund O'Donovan. Edmund O'Donovan was born in Dublin on the 13th of September 1844. As teenagers, O'Donovan and most of his brothers joined the Irish Republican Brotherhood. He was arrested 3 times and detained for some months. He was subsequently an active IRB organiser in the north of England, while turning to journalism as a career. He delighted in adventures and was a skilled linguist as well as a weapons expert. He remained on excellent terms with Irish revolutionaries to the end of his life. He began his newspaper career with the Irish Times in 1866. After the Battle of Sedan, fought on the 1st of September 1870 during the Franco-Prussian War, O'Donovan joined the Foreign Legion of the French army and was wounded and taken prisoner by the Germans. In 1873, the Carlist Rising attracted him to Spain, and he wrote many newspaper letters on the campaign. 3 years later, he represented the London Daily News during the rising of Bosnia and Herzegovina against the Turks, and in 1879, for the same paper, made his adventurous and famous journey to Merv. On his arrival at Merv, the Turkomans, suspecting him to be a Russian spy, detained him. Following several months' captivity, O'Donovan managed to get a message to his principals through to Persia, and it was then telegraphed to England. These adventures he described in The Merv Oasis, published in 1882. In the following year, 1883, Edmund O'Donovan accompanied the ill-fated expedition of Hicks Pasha to the Egyptian Sudan, where he died. From 1856, John O'Donovan was more or less in a permanently depressed mood, embittered most of all by the miserly pension of £50 awarded him from the Literary Fund. In his correspondence from this point onwards, we find regular references to his declining health, precarious financial situation, and a nostalgia for his days of his youth in Slieverue. John O'Donovan died in December of 1861, aged 55. He's buried in the O'Connell Circle in Glasnevin Cemetery.